Smoggy rain's great if you're in the mood for a gentle drenching that soaks you good. And it's no use complaining, no use at all, for winds must blow and rains must fall. That was a curious accent. Hi everybody, it's Margaret. You've landed on my channel. Welcome to Booktube. I am reciting a teensy weensy poem from this little book of Scottish Rain by Ron Butlin, illustrated by Tim Kirby. I had gotten this a long time ago and it tickles me. It's just fun. It's all the different words for rain, kind of like the Inuit have for snow, purportedly. Smuggy, Smugggy, is an Aberdonian term, apparently, for the fine quality of drizzle. And here's the illustration. Aye, still raining, William. To the statue, I assume, of William the Conqueror, because it looks like 11th century. So I thought that was cute. So yes, it is a perfect Scottish weather day here. It is smuggy. There's a fine quality of drizzle out there. And so it is the day before Burns Night, which is when people celebrate Burns Supper. So I figured I would do a little, I don't know, informational thing about it, celebrate, do some poetry. The perfect guest is here to say hello, and that's Anita, who says yay for Robbie Burns. Anita also does poetry. And so what I was intending to do is explain my connection, like what is Burns Night, first of all, for anyone who doesn't know at all. But then also, why do I concern myself with it? I am a Californian living in Oregon. For the rest of the world, that's the west coast of the United States. So what is this Scottish folk hero poet doing up in my brand, right? So I am a historical fiction author, if you didn't know, and a little bit of speculative fiction. So I've spent a lot of time in Scotland investigating history, although not Burns era. So we'll get to that in just a second. But yes, I'm going to be talking about what is it? Why do I have anything to do with it? And yeah, I've got some materials and some recitations. And if we are still okay at the end, I'll sing a little song that is associated with Robert Burns. Yay! Leslie is here. Hello, hello. Happy Wednesday. And Anita says Burns Night is big in Nova Scotia. Well, of course, yes. So there's two things to call it. You can call it Burns Night, and basically that is the birthday of Robert Burns, the Scottish poet. Or you can call it the Burns Supper, because usually how you celebrate it is having a big dinner celebration. Usually it's pretty formal, and you have an organization that hosts at a big place, and there's dancing and there's a stage and there's musicians, and it's really fun. So I put a few of those things on the thumbnail just to indicate, yes, bagpipes are usually involved, and a haggis is usually considered necessities. And in case you don't know what a haggis is, it's coming from the tradition of peasants doing the most they could with the little food they had. So it's basically barley and onions cooked up in a sheep's stomach. So it's like a very hearty and thrifty dish. And there's lots of other stuff that you're basically using offal. So anyway, there's also usually whiskey or scotch. And yeah, it's usually a fun celebration. So who is it about? Up. Must have the haggis. Hi, Richard. Richard says, I was saying Boorns. Is that an accent thing, or is that you trying to say boo? I'm not sure. Either way, who is this guy, right? He's a poet. He lived in the 18th century, died right before 1800. And he did a variety of odd jobs, including tax collecting. Here's what I'm going to treat you to here. Let's see. 25. I did key this up beforehand. So I got this book several years ago when I had something called a Wee Box, which was a subscription box. I only did it for a couple months, but sort of Outlander inspired, and they did one for January that was talking all about burn suppers. So I got the burn supper book. And basically, the man himself, there's four different aspects you can choose to highlight when you talk about Robert Burns. And this author, Clark McGinn, summarizes them as plowman, poet, radical, Wadar meddle with me school. So that's one of the schools of thought, that he was a plowman, poet, radical, don't mess with me kind of type. The second one is the demon lover, drinker, writer school. So a little bit of an Ernest Hemingway character walking about, being possessed by muses. He wrote Tam O'Shanter, which is a haunted tale if you are curious. The third one is the romantic lay me down and die school, which is, of course, associated with his many children he fathered on many different women on all his travels, which is, questionable for the time, for now, what have you. And the last one is the National Bard of Scots Wahey School. So that's a very stirring, emotional, sort of cultural touch point song. And he's got several of those that were poems turned into songs, or poems that he used older songs for. And National Bard, meaning he's sort of become a symbol of Scotland. So that's another reason to celebrate him. So pick your sort of highlight feature you want to focus on, right? You can't get around the fact that he's a dead white guy, which, is something we're trying to get away from focusing on nowadays, and trying to be more equal in our revered subjects. He was also someone who lived in the age of chattel slavery, so end of the 18th century. One of my current research topics is the prevalence and viability for young men in that era, the second half of the 18th century, in Scotland, no less, to pick up stakes, head to the West Indies, become an agent, meaning arranging trade, in cotton, in tobacco, in sugar, in rum, and make a fortune after a decade and come back home to Scotland with thousands of pounds and making a big house and a, very wealthy lifestyle out of that. And it's kind of like this weird moment in history. So that's very interesting. But like I said, four different aspects of Robert Burns. He left us a lot of poetry. He left us a lot of contradictions. Um, and he's sort of a creative genius, got a lot of interesting things. He collected folklore as he went around Scotland on his travels, as well as children spreading. And yeah, so he's a very interesting character. So all this to say that when I talk about Burns suppers and Burns nights, I'm not endorsing him. Like, he has some interesting things to discuss in his poetry, but like, he's not my favorite Scottish character in history. So I'll just put that out there. And yeah, so we'll get to a little bit of the poetry side. I was just gonna say hi to the Eloise Bar Wrights, who came in to say happy Wednesday. And yes, it's a Simpsons reference. Oh, well, I know Mr. Burns is a Simpsons character. I didn't know it was said that way. Okay. All right. Sounds good. And Eloise gives the reference I do understand, which is excellent. Yes, definitely Burns sowing his wild oats. And oats in Scotland. What a clever reference. So let's see. We've got recommendations for what you do at a burn supper. I'll just read those to you. There's like 5. What do you normally do at a burn supper? Well, this person recommends that you have an address to the haggis, which is a famous poem by Robert Burns, where you usually have a bagpiper, pipe, and the person behind him, kind of like a priest would enter with a banner in front of him at a mass, but I don't know if everyone gets that reference. So you have a piper, pipe in the haggis, which means you have a steaming hot plate of food, and it's being announced with the bagpipes, just to appreciate the bounty that you're going to share with your peeps. So I told you what haggis was. There's also things called neeps and tatties, which is the Scots way of saying turnips or neeps, and tatties or potatoes. Potatoes. So, even if you can't handle the haggis part, there's other food usually. So, addressing the haggis, we've got the toast to the immortal memory of Robert Burns, which is basically celebrating some aspect of the poet. Good food, plenty of drink, convivial company. Yep. And a recitation and celebration of the works of the poet. So that is that book. I'm not going to pop it open now because it's noon. But I did get this during the snowstorm or right before to be prepared, and it's a single malt scotch. Glenmorangie is one of the first that I tried. It's affordable. I have the glass from a place that is not. It's see if you can read that spelling and guess how it's pronounced. It's Bonahaven. It's not too bad. It's just one unfamiliar sort of consonant grouping. But that's the unaffordable place. And so I'm using the glass for the affordable whiskey. But maybe we'll do that later, not before I have to sing. That's the key point. No whiskey before singing. I did have this during our watch party with JD Estrada. So if you're curious how I respond to whiskey on air live, just watch our watch party for the AWC of Leslie Penelope's presentation. It was great. So food, drink, and company, and that is a Burns supper. So I've participated several times in Burns suppers. I have some of the images from my old photos on the thumbnail as well. One was very formal. That was actually, I think, at a Burns supper that was organized by some fusty big organization in Alexandria, Virginia, which I was invited to when I still lived in DC, and there was a ball, and it was like expensive, and had to dress up. So strapless dress. But since then, what I've found here in Portland is that with my Gaelic group, Gaelic is the Scottish language that is not Scots that Byrne talked. I'll separate those in a second. We would do our own sort of small little dinner party where we had haggis and vegetarian haggis, neeps, tatties, whiskey, a bagpiper, and we all sort of like helped fill in the poetry and the conviviality, if you will. And that has been really lovely as well. So the difference in the language, I learned Scots Gaelic with this group for about 3 years. And that is your incomprehensible, different spellings, different sounds. You wouldn't be able to read it on a road sign if you were in Scotland kind of language. It has lots of similarities to Irish Gaelic. And so that is a related sort of language group. But Scots, what Robert Burns he wrote in Scots accented English as well as Lallans Scots. And the Lallans, Lallans, is a sort of adaptation of Lowlands. So Lowlands Scots. It's a dialect rather than a language. It has lots of interesting words and omissions and things sounding different for sure, but it is well, I don't remember exactly the language derivation, but it is based in English rather than Gaelic. So that is interesting about Burns's poetry. When I say I participated in Burns suppers, the first one, the fancy one back in DC, was before I knew anything about the historical context. I went to the parade in Alexandria. I saw lots of people in kilts. I'd read Outlander. Like, that was the extent of my knowledge of Scotland. And so I was not overly bothered by anything said at this dinner. But then I became a writer. I started investigating the historical context, and things became more complicated, which is why I gave the little sort of caveat about I'm not endorsing Robert Burns as a perfect historical character, because of the age he lived in and choices he made and that sort of thing. But I do enjoy learning about what was happening at that time because 1780s and 90s is right before my novel starts, so 1820s. And, the 30 years before is sort of like what is propelling my characters. Like, that's the clearances, and that's the change of the political government, and that's industrialization and urbanization just starting. Scotland's going through all this upheaval. So, definitely relevant for Remnants, my historical fiction series. And I did actually talk about this in a previous video, like a long time ago, before I had any subscribers when I just started. So, in case you're curious, I have a video that's about author backstory, how my family heritage slash ethnic background affects my writing. And basically, I talked a little bit about finding out that I was Scottish and like always knowing I was Irish and choosing what to write and choosing what was inspiring me and how that was sort of a strange thing. So that was a fun video. Yes, complicated time and person to celebrate. But I love to celebrate this day not only because it gives me an excuse to talk about Scotland, but also because it celebrates art. So, right, how many holidays do you have in America, God forbid, that celebrate art and poetry? Like, I can't think of any. So, this is one that's like an import, but it's a good chance to read some poetry. Also, community, it's people getting together to remember communal history and memory. So, I'm going to use those things as my guidelines for what to share with you in terms of recitation. So, I don't have a lot of poetry here. I did go through like my poetry collection, which is very scant. And I thought I would share what art, community, and memory sort of made me think of. I went through some of my turned down pages in my poetry collections that I have retained. And the first one, they're kind of sad. So, prepare yourself. Leslie's laughing at Outlander. Thank you. Um, the first one is on the subject of memory. It's from Application of Shadows, which is a little thin poetry collection from my friend Tola, a Molotkov. That's not Molotov, that's Molotkov. Some of his books are on Bookshop, but not this one, unfortunately. And so I was in a writing group with Tola, and this is one of the poems that really stayed with me and I think is really moving. So I'll just share it with you here. I last saw my mother 7 years ago at the airport, a receding figure, there, gone, re-emerging for a second, gone. In darkness, in silence, we can establish if it's all worth it, if the past is worth the future, and vice versa. It's easy to imagine myself in her place. I cooked her a meal one morning, fried bologna and potatoes. She used to make me when I was a child, and now, with mortality in mind, I replayed the gesture. Each time we make a choice, we are closer to the moment when we have no choices left. Years receding, summers disappearing, without a trace. Memory, the only place she lives. Memory, the only gift I can give her. So I thought that was really good, really touching. Poetry is a good place for the Celts to get out emotion. So, if anyone is feeling down with the winter blues, read some poetry. I've got another one, which is a little bit about grief as well. This is from a book called Soul Food. It's a collection of multiple poets. And my friend Kendra sent this to me quite a while ago now. It is called Burlap Sack by Jane Hirschfield. A person is full of sorrow, the way a burlap sack is full of stones or sand. We say, "Hand me the sack," but we get the weight. Heavier if left out in the rain. To think that the sand or stones are the self is an error. To think that grief is the self is an error. Self carries grief as a pack mule carries the side bags, being careful between the trees to leave extra room. The mule is not the load of ropes and nails and axes. The self is not the miner, nor builder, nor driver. What would it be to take the bride and leave behind the heavy dowry? To let the thin-ribbed mule browse in tall grasses, its long ears waggling like the tails of two happy dogs. So that was like trying to get you to be happier. So I liked that one. Letting go of the grief in the sack. And I do have a Burns poem to share with you. Oh, all right. Let me catch up. Lovely poem. So Anita likes Tola's poem. Cat Paw is here. So this is very moving. Thank you. Anita wrote some poetry today. Oh, excellent. Were you inspired by Robert Burns' birthday coming up or completely different? Eloise says that was a beautiful poem. Yeah, I think they're both pretty beautiful. So the next one is less sad, emo, and the next one is a Burns poem, actually. I was looking for some short ones because the ones that are associated with Burns Night are rather long. Tam O'Shanter is super long. Addressed to a Haggis is super long. A Man's a Man for All That is also super long, even though I really like that one, and it is a song. Oh, okay. The poem is for submitting to an anthology. Very good. Go, Anita. So I just looked at some of his shorter poems, and this one, which I don't think I'd read before, is called Lines Written on a Banknote. Banknote being like currency. Woe worth thy power, thou cursed leaf! Fell source o' all my woe and grief. For lack o' thee I've lost my lass. For lack o' thee I scrimp my glass. I see the children of affliction unaided through thy cursed restriction. I've seen the presser's cruel smile amid his hapless victims' spoil, and for thy potence vainly wished to crush the villain in the dust. For lack of thee, I leave this much-loved shore, never, perhaps, to great old Scotland more. So this is the person who's emigrating away from Scotland and cursing the fact that he has no cash. So I thought that was kind of neat that he wrote it on a banknote, but presaging emigration and remnants, my historical fiction series. What do you know? What else did I queue up for you guys today? I think that is it. I've got the song at the end. The whiskey. Oh, I didn't show you this. This is something I keep in my little bookcase. It's like a miniature of all the things you need for a burn supper. So let's see if I can do this backwards. That is like the haggis. That's like the sheep bladder wrapped up all the stuff inside. And then you've got potatoes over here, and you've got a Glenfiddich Scotch bottle right there, and you've got some, I guess, pasties here with like the little crimped edges, and you've got Robert Burns' volume of poetry, and it's just so cute. Little basket, little plaid tartan, and romantic era. So that's sort of representative. So cute. And basically, the last thing I was going to do is the parting song. So when you end a Burns supper and you have all these people who are probably drunk by now and having a great time, there's usually a sort of like ending song. And if it's New Year's Eve, it would be Auld Lang Syne, which is a Robert Burns poem. And not my favorite, just because it's got modern connotations of drunk New Year's Eve, which is not my favorite. But there is an older than Burns poem that is set to music called The Parting Glass, which I love. It's sung by, oh, I'm just blanking on their name. It's a group of 2 sisters that do wonderful harmonies in the Pacific Northwest area, the Something Sisters. Anyway, Hozier also did a version, um, on was it Jimmy Fallon or The Late Show? Um, The Late Late Show, apparently. And yeah, The Parting Glass, it's actually been traced back to the 17th century. So older than Burns, but better than Auld Lang Syne as the tradition, I think. And there's 4 verses in the Wikipedia version, but one of them is about a girl and one of them's, I don't know, like a little getting away from the point. So I figured I would just sing the first 2, and usually it's done a little slow. I'm gonna speed it up a little just so that it's got a bit of swing. So to close today, The Parting Glass. And I'm gonna take some water first. Oof. Of all the money that e'er I had, I've spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I done, alas, it was to none but me. For all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away. And of all the sweethearts that e'er I had, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But as it falls unto my lot that I must go and you must not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all. So, happy Burns Day. Maybe read some poetry tomorrow, share some food and drink with convivial company, or read some historical fiction. Who knows? And maybe it will chase the winter blues away. So I hope everyone has fun with a little peek into this old Scottish poet, and I don't know, have it brighten your day and sprinkle your reading with a little poetry and song. Thanks for watching, everybody, and you're very sweet. Thank you. I will see you again soon. The only update I have is that I'm still looking for people to read for the February readathon. I'm hosting the Black Author Tuber readathon. So we've got lots of great books in all different genres. And that is in the comments. If you are curious, we've loaded a bunch in there. Leslie has helped add on some new ones and even some nonfiction. Oh, Brian is here. Good question, Brian. Brian from Bookish, do you think that we have some kind of ancestral, inborn, emotional connection to the music and landscape of places that our ancestors came from? I think we do, but I also think we're being driven to a sort of solastalgia because of modern society and capitalism. How's that for an answer? I actually talked about the concept of home in historical fiction and how it's a little controversial, it's a little problematic. It needs to be talked about because I was explaining with 2 other authors who I adore and admire, um, how I feel about Scotland as a sort of ancestral landscape, and, there's a lot of other things to consider in that, how did my ancestors interact with that landscape, and why did they leave, and how has their conduct been since then, and how do they talk to the homeland? If you've been on TikTok, you know that there's a lot of pissed off Scots people because Outlander has made it so popular and Scotland's been so romanticized anyway that there's a lot of people in America who lay claim to Scottish heritage, but use that as an anchor for very nefarious words and deeds, let's say. And so they're like, dude, you're not Scottish. So it's a complicated discussion for Americans, but emotional connection for sure is there. And that's part of what drives me to write historical fiction is finding the history that I can like resonate with and sharing that out as stories for people today. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, great question from a fellow Scottish American descendant. And thanks for watching, everybody. Slàinte. And what you say when you cheers back is, sorry, I say slàinte and you say slàinte. I'll see you guys later. Bye.